start our weekly gatherings with words of gathering coming together. And today, our student Jamie Fluker has offered to bring us into this space together. So Jamie, I'll turn to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lisa. My name again, Jamie Fluker. I am a womanist scholar, community organizer, and ordained clergy. I'm currently pursuing my doctorate at CTS. I grew up Christian in the Church of God in Anderson, Indiana. I attended an ELCA undergraduate institution. So 4 years, I felt like I was Lutheran, and then left school and have joined a number of Baptist congregations and worship with a local Baptist congregation in Chicago. I've been at a Disciples of Christ seminary, and now I'm at a UCC seminary, which means I think in some regards, I laugh and sometimes say, I guess I'm a bit of a religious mutt, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I've picked up great things along the way. But my faith calls me to the intersections of my experience as a scholar, a community organizer, and as clergy. And so today's words of gathering speak to those. I pray that your faith calls you into dialogue. I pray that your faith calls you into collaborative movements. I pray your faith calls you into the work of justice for the marginalized, for the oppressed, for the discounted, and for those who are counted out. May the hands that worship also work towards liberation and love. May the voices that praise also be lifted in protest. May the feet that move also march in solidarity. As we press towards a mark, a higher calling, where every life can experience liberation and love, I invite you to breathe with me. Let us inhale strength and exhale weariness. Inhale wisdom and exhale imprudence. Inhale courage and exhale fear. Inhale peace and exhale discord. Inhale love and exhale enmity. May each breath we take be filled with passion, purpose, and the pursuit of justice. May the Creator, the Holy One, honor each breath. Amen.
Amen, Jamie. Thank you for those beautiful words of welcome. I feel very much centered and in this space and appreciated the opportunity to breathe together. This week, friends, our topic for discussion is collective liberation. No pride for some of us without liberation for all of us. And this week we are thrilled to welcome as our featured guest, Reverend M. Barclay from Enfleshed. Created in 2017 out of a deep longing for engagement with the sacred through collective, liberative, creative, and nourishing practices and ideas, unencumbered by dogma, religious respectability politics, or denominational ties. Enfleshed creates and facilitates spiritual resources for collective liberation through prayer, liturgies, art, meditations, teachings, and other resources. Full disclosure here, Enfleshed is an organization close to my heart, and I am honored to serve on their board and to have had the opportunity through that connection to get to know M. Reverend M. Barclay is the co-founder and director of Enfleshed. M was born and raised in the Deep South and comes from a fundamentalist background. They have spent years unlearning both toxic theologies and social norms. M will be joined in conversation today with CTS students Mac Buff and Danny Patrick. I'm so excited to welcome all three of you here, and I'll turn it to you now, friends.
Thank you, Lisa. I am very excited to have this time together as well. Today is World AIDS Day, and so we are going to open with a liturgy that recognizes that. But I also want to acknowledge that as we started our time together, we experienced some violence that was done. And this liturgy, I hope, will be a moment for us to reground ourselves in the counter forces of building community that will heal wounds leading to violence and will heal the violence that has been done of all kinds. I'm going to take a moment and share my screen so that you all can see the liturgy as we go as well. To the living and the dead, we bear witness. We gather in an act of remembrance of all our ancestors, and in particular, all those lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people who have died in the struggle with AIDS, especially those who were denied adequate health care and were targets of racism, sexism, poverty, violence, transmisogynoir, homophobia, and other evils. Ours is a remembrance rooted in a spirit of solidarity and a spirit of resistance, a resistance that strengthens and empowers us to live and act boldly. We make sacred space by purifying our space with earth, with wind, with water, and with fire, in honor of our Mother Earth, who gives us life and to whom we return. Bring the four elements into your space in whatever way you can. And we greet the four directions. Turn to face each direction in body or spirit as we greet it. Turning east, we welcome the sunrise, which brings new birth, the hope of a more just and healed future. Turning south, where the sun is at its zenith, we rest in warmth of love from our community, even in times of hardship. Turning west toward the sunset, we face the darkness of uncertainty, the night we must travel through. Turning north, where the whiteness of snow reminds us of the hair of our elders, their wisdom and witness, we honor those who have gone before us. We invite our ancestors and communities of saints to be present with us, bringing their spirit of resistance. As we pause to welcome them, I'll give you a moment to unmute and speak or write in the chat the names of ancestors in spirit or body that you wish to honor today. As we remember these ancestors, we say together, those who have gone before us, rise up and call their names.
Those who have gone before us, rise up and call their names.
This is our healing of the pain of our losses. This is our self-empowerment as we create and claim the past, the present, and the future as our own, saying, never again.
Compassionate Holy One, open our hearts and minds and hands so that we may connect ourselves to the global community of others responding to AIDS as we pray. Remember all the people in this country and around the world who are living with AIDS.
Justice demands that we remember and respond.
We remember all who care for people living and dying with AIDS in their homes, in hospices, and in support centers.
Justice demands that we remember and respond.
We remember all who are involved in research and hospital care, that they may respect the dignity of each person.
Justice demands that we remember and respond.
We remember all partners who are left mourning for their beloved ones.
Justice demands that we remember and respond.
We remember all parents who learned the truth of their children's lives through their process of facing death.
Justice demands that we remember and respond.
We remember especially the queer and trans people, BIPOC communities, sex workers, and people who use drugs that have and continue to bear systemically disproportionate stigma, neglect, and loss related to HIV and AIDS.
Justice demands that we remember and respond. As we gather together in this virtual space, in the midst of another virus that brings up old pain, reveals old prejudices, and calls us again to take care of each other, we light this one candle as a symbol of many. We bear witness to the thousands upon thousands of candles that have been lit over the years in prayer, remembrance, desperate hope, and deep grief. Within this flame, may we recognize anew our own sacred power, granted by the divine and practiced through our flesh, as we recommit to building a world free from anti-Blackness, anti-queer, and anti-trans forces, poverty, colonization, ableism, lack of access to healthcare, and all stigmatizing forces that entangle with HIV and AIDS. Danny, you're muted.
Try this again. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous. And all for your love's sake. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, friends, for engaging in that liturgy with us. This liturgy was adapted from one that I wrote along with a few colleagues for a class on queer, feminist, womanist ritualizing with Dr. Scott Haldeman over the January term this year. And in the course of writing this liturgy, we consulted a number of different resources. For this one today, we also included some from Enfleshed in the lighting of the candles. And as we put together this liturgy as a group of students originally, we were thinking of healing and of liberation and how liturgies can bring healing and can bring liberation, or can be a liberatory force for those who participate in them, for the church and for the world more broadly. So that's what we'll be talking a little bit about as a group today. Em, I'd love to hear from you what you think about liturgy as a liberating force.
Thank you, Mac and Danny, for that. And thank you, Lisa, for the invitation to be here today. I'm excited to be in conversation with Danny and Mac, and hopefully others who are present here today about our shared calling to use liturgy for the work of liberation, and what that means in our different contexts, in our different frameworks of meaning, and our different languages, etc. And so I hope that we'll have some space to hear from others. But I know for us at Enfleshed, we started doing, so one of the things that we offer is weekly liturgy and sermon commentary, particularly from a lens of liberation to clergy across the country and a few folks beyond the United States. And one of the things that had us start this work was just feeling like there are so many times we step into worship spaces where there are so many words used and it's like nothing is said, you know, and I don't know about you all, but I feel like engaging in work of justice in any form that is sustainable requires being spiritually nourished. There's just no way for me to continue showing up to the work in the world that I believe in without taking in words that feel like bread. And so for us, liturgy and liberation go hand in hand in the sense that liturgy is a chance to realign with belief in the midst of living under dominant systems, destructive systems, all feeding us things that sometimes we know we don't believe, but still get in there somehow anyway. And other times we don't even realize are contributing to poison. To be able to be in a space that helps me remember what I believe again is so critical for showing up to the work of liberation. And then also practicing moral imagination. Liturgy feels to me like a space to like really exercise one of the most beautiful things that I think spirituality and theology have to offer us in the work of justice, which is imagination, which is trying on what a different world might look like and feel like, what it might feel to say things differently, to be different together in community. And so those are some of the things that frame what I think of when I think of liturgy and liberation together, the ways that they shape how, of course, how we're living in community together. But I would love to hear from Danny and Mac what resonates there and what might feel different.
I think for me, the kind of role and purpose of liturgy when we're looking at liberation work is it really gives us the opportunity to kind of share our story and, like you said, use imagination. We're able to bring our full self into the work. And because we're so unique and we're so different, we're able to creatively use our words and bring our differences in. And so we're able to speak for those who may be marginalized and kind of bring it to the forefront, where a lot of liturgy, like you said, are kind of those earworms that kind of get in to our brain and can poison us. But we can kind of change that and bring in new words and imagine something different. And so I find kind of the purpose of liturgy is that just that opportunity to kind of do something different, be creative, kind of use those skills that we've been given by the divine to really stretch ourselves and grow.
Yeah, I think about the importance of representation, and what gets liturgized is what people think of as sacred. And so when we don't see ourselves reflected in liturgy, then we maybe don't think of ourselves as sacred. So to me, some of what's really liberating in liturgy is to say this experience is also sacred. This way that you're living, this thing that you're moving through also has potential to be sacred and to be a connection to the divine, and to be able to recognize the divinity in each of us and in each of our experiences through liturgy by affirming that.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. And I think for me, one of the things that, well, frankly, frustrates me is how rarely especially in primarily white denominations and worshiping spaces, power is brought into liturgy, and how critical it is for us to disrupt traditions of worship spaces being oriented solely around comfort, or solely around a sense of familiarity, versus like using this incredible opportunity where people, ideally, we're showing up with a sense of openness to what God has to reveal to us, openness to each other, openness to ourselves, to be able to bring delicate and serious and difficult words for navigating power dynamics into that space. It feels to me like the difference between reinforcing those power structures by pretending like they're not there and God has nothing to do with them by nature of them not being present in liturgy in any way, or really inviting God into the midst of our struggles with power, our struggles against power, our struggles to claim the sacred power that God has given us. I long for more and more liturgy that enables us to do that work well together. I think we're finding our way in various communities around that. But one of the things that I find difficult is like, how do we keep the poetic, human, beautiful elements of what liturgy can do in terms of connecting us to mystery, connecting us to spirit, connecting us to these things that are so hard to talk about, and because language is so limited, and talk about power structures, which the language around power structures can be so flat and like so just hard, you know? And so like trying to find ways to do that together is one of the things that really interests me. And yeah, I'd be curious to hear y'all's thoughts.
I mean, I think that's one of the ways in which creative liturgy writing can disrupt some powers of who gets to write the liturgy, who gets to say the liturgy. Thinking about how the power structures are enacted in the way that we do liturgy, as well as in what we're saying. There can be some creative ways to go about that.
And I think that's something that when I was going through kind of thinking about what we were going to talk about today, kind of going into one of the courses that I'm in, we talked about queering, different things. So like queering liturgies, disrupting the normal, disrupting what's going on. So, that's kind of what we're attempting to do is to, in this case, queer liturgy. We're going to disrupt what's normal. We're going to go into things that are different. We're going to address issues and topics that are, not normally mentioned, and kind of dig deep and kind of mention them. Like you said, it is difficult to mention topics that people are a little like, I don't really want to talk about these. And some of the terminology and the wording is not the most fun to talk about. But that is kind of where we get to use our imagination and try to be a little more creative. And I think that's, again, where Mac comes in and says, who's writing it, who's doing it, so we can kind of bring people into the fore and say, hey, kind of including other people in, because where we get those other perspectives from really can help us in creating those liturgy. Because if we have the same people doing it, we're getting that same fixed perspective every time. But if we can include others into it, then we can kind of see, okay, well, someone else has this other perspective that's really going to help us to maybe give us something new that will allow us to speak differently on a topic. So that, I think that's something that is wise, that people can get stuck into thinking, well, only this person can write this. No, everyone has the capacity to be able to engage with the divine and to be able to do this. It's not just a, just you can do this. So I think that's an important thing to be able to engage.
Yeah. I'm seeing a question here that we might dive into if that's okay. Wayne asked, any help, thoughts for those of us leading worship in the Advent season, things to say that perhaps haven't been said, need to be said, etc. I love that question, and blessings on all of you who are doing that work and asking these questions in your communities. A few things for me immediately come to mind is disrupting white supremacy and light supremacy. Advent so often is a time where light and dark are pitted against one another, and light is given positive value and darkness is given negative value, spiritually, metaphorically, and that continues to reinforce cultures of white supremacy. And to be able to provide each other different entry points for our relationship to darkness. Worship is a phenomenal opportunity for that. Being intentional, not just to avoid that dichotomy, but to queer it, to queer the light and dark as if they're opposite, but also to prioritize pointing to and inviting people into the spiritual gifts of darkness, I think is a real opportunity present in Advent. And I think for me, another thing is so at Enfleshed, one of our priorities is emphasizing incarnation, right? And so like, how do we tell the story of this baby being born and the significance that can hold within our Christian tradition without de-emphasizing the many different forms of incarnation that God manifests in the world, that doesn't participate in Christian supremacy by making this one incarnation the only way that God takes on flesh in the world. There are ways within tradition to keep from doing that, to help expand the understanding of the many, many different ways God shows up within and for and among us, while still being true to the story and to our faith in the different ways that we claim Christ among us. So those are two different things that come to mind for me. And then of course, always being careful about how we frame God's engagement with Mary, and making sure we're either highlighting consent in the relationship between God and Mary, or taking a more honest approach to the ways that that consent hasn't been there and how the story has been told, and how we have the power to do things differently, and to speak of God differently. What about y'all?
I mean, I love Advent. It's one of my favorite seasons. I am really drawn to the times of liminal space in the Christian calendar, and Advent is one of those.
It's so queer. Yeah.
It's so queer, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I am drawn to that in part because I am non-binary and I kind of live in a liminal space. And so there are some things that you can do with liminal spaces, the spaces in between, that really examine many ways that we live in between in our own lives.
Mm-hmm. I also think there's a lot of opportunity, and especially if anybody is using the John text, I love playing with the word taking on flesh as a form of talking about God transitioning. I think there's a lot there to, including LGBTQ people in worship services or our leading them, whatever. That's all great and so important and still doesn't happen enough, et cetera. But we also have to be mindful of actually queering words about God and our understanding of God, and how is God actually revealed as queer people and as trans, well, people, but in and through us. Anyway, so there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to bring queerness and transness into the center of the Christian story. But anyway, sorry, Danny, I just get excited about incarnation and transition.
No, absolutely. No, it's just like Max said, you know, it's finding ourselves in the sacred. So that ties right into that. So no, one of the things that I find in the Advent season is the, you know, kind of that power dynamic of you think about the patriarchal society, you know, God goes to Mary first, and you'd think God would go to the man first, but no, it goes to Mary. So you think about that shift in the patriarchal structure that was going on. That's kind of my one tidbit into that foray there. But yeah, you all kind of said everything I think that would be helpful for the Advent season. So, but I get just as excited about queering the incarnation. So I think that's a great thing to include.
I think one of the other things, sorry, I just have so many, like we need to do everything differently is like how my instincts, so there's a million opportunities to do things differently, which is exciting and daunting. But I'm also aware of, especially in Advent, the way that we can talk about the Messiah coming and the world altering shift of this baby, the way that depending on how we engage that story, we can call each other into our own power, again, by emphasizing the way that God takes on flesh in bodies like ours, in the world, the land, the earth like ours. Or we can slip into making it so about this one person, right? That we don't have a world to show up to in terms of taking our God-given responsibility to show up with and for each other for this collective calling to transform the world, right? Like, how do we talk about what it means to encounter this Jesus figure while still staying, not even still, while recognizing in that baby figure our own invitation to incarnate divinity for the sake of collective flourishing, right? Those can easily go one way or the other in the Advent season. And this world is in desperate need of all of us to be in touch with our God-given power, not saying like, oh, cool, that baby's got it, you know? So, and as much as we can queer incarnation so that we can find it within ourselves, the better for all of us. Are there other questions around liturgies? One of the things I would love to know, I don't know if anybody is interested in putting this in the chat, but is like, what are the liturgies that you all long for in the world but have never experienced? Like, are there personal, intimate aspects of life that you think like, man, I just wish like this is something that we ritualize together in worship and I've never encountered that? Or maybe collective experiences. I know like the way that grief and mourning in the midst of COVID has just kind of been like pushed down and suppressed and pushed aside by so many different forces, leaves me feeling like, oh, we really need more ways of getting in touch again with, I think, histories of holding grief together in community, providing actual rituals for mourning. So I'd love to hear some other things that y'all are thinking about. Like, what are the liturgies we need in the world? Domestic violence, yes, thank you. we need those done with a lens of liberation, right? The ones that draw us closer to a world where systems don't reinforce patterns of domestic violence, and that both honor the intimate individual experience, but also provide us with a theological understanding of a God who is anti-domestic violence. What else? Oh, the role of friendship in queer communities, yes. Friendship in general, where are the liturgies around friendships? It's such a critical part of being human. And what words have we been given? What understanding of God have we been given for navigating those? Queer relationships, yes. Trans everything. We need trans everything liturgies. Kinship models that don't revolve around marriage and childbearing, yes, or monogamy. We need liturgies for polyamory. Yeah. Mac and Danny, what about y'all?
I'm thinking about some liturgies that I was longing for and have seen happen in community or have been part of. So I have a friend who got this beautiful back tattoo, takes up their whole back, and they had a ritual before they got their tattoo and another one after to like mark that tattoo and what it meant to them. And then when I started a part of my medical transition, I had a ritual that honored my body and the changes that it was going through. And Em actually wrote some of the liturgy for that, which was beautiful. So finding ways to ritualize the moments in our lives that are important, regardless of whether there's things that maybe are in traditional models of what's important in your life. So like Annabeth was saying, not revolving around marriage and childbearing, but what are the other things that are important in our life and meaningful in our life that are happening that we can create liturgy and ritual around as a community?
I definitely have to mirror a little bit of Mac's there. I am also non-binary, going to be medically transitioning in the near future. So the liturgy of revolving around that, I've not heard much, if any, of that. So that's something that I long for. So that's certainly something that I would want to hear more of. I want to hear more of myself, being a non-binary person of faith. I want to hear more of myself within liturgy. Another thing, I don't hear much of it, and I don't know if it's just the area I live in, but in Michigan, we recently had, another, gun violence, another issue with gun violence. I don't hear a lot of liturgy and revolving around that. And there's a lot of lament in that, but I want to hear, more in revolving around that. But yeah, I really echo a lot of what Annabeth said and what Wayne said. I think there's a lot that we can find within queer communities with relationship, friendship, really getting those liturgies created and out there.
And thinking about the ways that I just feel so conflicted around the life-saving life-saving and critical work being done by so many churches that are trying to move into queer affirming practices and words, and how the lack of access to those liturgies and rituals, the few places for people to turn are still so limited that I mean, a lot of them are are still reinforcing whiteness, if not white supremacy, right? Are still reinforcing cisnormativity. And I'm just particularly aware of the ways that it is so important to be doing these individual, intimate, personalized liturgies for experiences that are overwhelmingly disregarded and demonized in the church, while also collectively needing to keep our eyes on the big picture here, you know, keep our eyes on a world that is crumbling under the ongoing effects of colonization on the climate, and how do we both tend to the intimate aspects of various lives that have been neglected, while also making sure that that work is always still being done in the direction of collective liberation, if that makes sense. I don't feel like I'm very clear on that dilemma, but I see it unfolding in ways that I always want to bring it back to, but are we doing that for the sake of all of us, right? Are we making sure we're taking care of each other in the intimate individual ways because ultimately where God is calling us together to move towards a world of flourishing? And yeah, I don't know. I'm babbling without a lot of clarity, but hopefully something is coming through there and what I mean. Yeah, I guess it's the temptation to bring in individual forms of affirmation and representation and liturgizing experiences is awesome, and we have to make sure we are also staying accountable to ultimately the collective, and not just getting lost in those little affirmations, which are great and important, but can further stagnate. I'm thinking especially, again, of primarily white progressive congregations. Yeah, I don't know if y'all have thoughts.
We don't want to get tunnel vision, ultimately, just kind of zeroing in and tunneling in on just one thing. We want to still keep the wide picture in place as well. No, I think I get where you're coming at, that we want to keep the big picture in mind. And I think that's, as long as we're keeping that in the back of our minds, I think we will not run the risk of, just picking and choosing our little things, but we have to definitely keep that in the back of our minds. If we don't, then we're definitely going to be stagnating and just kind of taking our little moments and picking our little individual things. And then, people, like you said, you started in flesh because people weren't being fed. Well, people aren't going to be fed if you're just picking those little moments. Some people might be, but majority are going to be left out and sitting on the sidelines and wondering, where's my moment? Where's my nourishment in this? So I think that's, as long as we're keeping our mind, being mindful, I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit about the difference between like doing liturgy that is inclusive, which matters. Like we need to be mindful of what words are including or excluding. I think one especially is like, how do we use the word we? Who do we mean when we say we in our congregations? But also inclusion is not liberation, right? Inclusion is oftentimes very individualized, is very much shaped by individuals who are present, who are defining what it means to include them or us, versus a community of people who are committed to reordering the world, right? those are very different tasks in liturgy. Liturgy that is doing both of those, it can be difficult to craft and to find, but we are capable. And there's so much potential and power there. Yeah.
I'm noticing in the chat that Lisa mentioned the need for deeper and better resources for interreligious and multi-spiritual spaces and communities. I think that goes sort of along with what you're saying, and that we can't even assume that we're only ritualizing Christian things, like that we're looking in a framework of interreligious, multi-spiritual spaces, lifting up and affirming particulars and difference, and also the unity and diversity in spaces with many different kinds of people, whether that be interreligious or multiracial or queer and non-queer. And how do we make sure that our rituals are being attentive to everyone?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wish I could remember the article, but there's this great article written by a Jewish queer person. I think it was in the 90s. It's old now, but it was so good. And she talked about ritual as where we go to practice. And so I've been thinking a lot about practice as possibility, in the way that worship is a place that we practice making the impossible possible, or dreaming the impossible things into possibility. And so just in regards to what you're saying, what are the words, what are the ways to be together that enable us to practice the things that don't feel possible outside of make believe for a minute, in the best of ways, right? Like we have to maybe perhaps Catherine Bell, I can't quite remember. I'm so sorry. It's like, I wish I could, because it's so good. But yeah, I really value the idea of ritual as a place we practice together, doing the world differently. I know we don't have much time left. Is there any final questions or things that y'all want to say, Mac or Danny?
Just a massive thank you. I think you have just given us a lot to think about. We appreciate the resource of Enfleshed. I found immense pleasure in reading the different resources you've provided. I know anyone that goes to it is going to find that it is a wonderful, engaging resource that they can use, especially if they're looking to provide liberative liturgy going forward. So just thank you so much for engaging with us today. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I will echo my thanks, to you and Mac and Danny. What a fabulous discussion today was. And I was really struck at the outset. You said something about so often, liturgy is all these words, but it says absolutely nothing. And I've definitely had that experience. And, it's really disappointing when you're looking for something and you really get nothing. And so, friends, earlier I put a link to Enfleshed's website in the chat. You will find resources that sometimes use a lot of words and sometimes use few words, but always say something with deep meaning. And there was so much of that richness in today's conversation too. So many, many thanks to all three of you, and blessings in this Advent season. Just a couple community announcements for us. I'm going to invite my friend and colleague Kim Schultz to make an announcement first.
Just an update on our podcast. Our podcast, Our Seven Neighbors, with the Interreligious Institute. We have dropped 4 episodes now. We are over halfway. We just dropped number 4 today. So if you haven't listened to it yet, I'm dropping the link in the chat, and it's also available everywhere you get your podcasts, and that's Our 7 Neighbors. And this one features Imam Abdul Malik Merchant talking about how a passport changed his life. So if you want to take a listen to that, and we have 2 more episodes coming, so there's 6 episodes total, 4 have dropped, and we hope that you will listen, subscribe, and hopefully learn and enjoy the episodes.
Thank you, Kim. One of the things that we do on a weekly basis is to recognize our students by selecting someone who gets a $10 Starbucks gift card, because students are always in need of caffeine and tasty warm beverages. And this week's student is Jamie Fluker. So Jamie, watch your email for a Starbucks gift card and go treat yourself to something special on us. We will be back again next week. We meet every Wednesday during the academic calendar. So we'll be back again next week. The link that brought you here today will bring you there next week. So you found us today, you can find us next week. We are welcoming Professor Darren Hutchinson next week. He is a professor of law and holds the John Lewis Chair for Civil Rights and Social Justice at Emory School of Law. He will be joined in conversation with Dr. Christoph Ringer and with Reverend Brian Smith. Their topic is going to be the weaponization of critical race theory. So really getting into what's been going on and what we're seeing, this phenomenon in school boards and other places of folks misrepresenting, misunderstanding, and using critical race theory by way of actually enacting racism in our schools. So should be a powerful conversation. Really, really looking forward to that. So encourage you to come attend. Reminder, all of these Wednesday gatherings are recorded and available on the main CTS website. So should you not be available, or if you're looking for other things to watch, listen to, in addition to the podcast, you can check out weeks that you might have missed. I think that's the end of my announcements. It has been a pleasure to be with all of you today. Again, big round of applause and thanks to our amazing guests today. I wish everyone peace in the coming week, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye, everybody.